You are listening to the sixth broadcast of TBR Radio presents the TBR History Hour with your host, TBR contributing editor, Dr. Ed DeVries. In today's show, Dr. Ed calls author Tom Goodrich. They talk about Tom's short-lived emigration to his ancestral homeland in Europe and how that has affected his writing. Also discussed are Tom's two articles in the current issue of the Barnes Review magazine. Articles on Boston Corbett, the assassin of the assassin, and of Buffalo Bill.
Each and every week, it's my honor, it's my privilege to be able to sit in this chair and set before this great microphone and to bring you yet another episode of TBR Radio. This week, our guest is Tom Goodrich. Those of you who are readers of TBR Magazine, you're already familiar with Tom's body of work, because every issue of the magazine you see at least one of his articles. Of course, Tom is the author of such best-selling books such as Hellstorm and The Death of Nazi Germany. He's a very prolific writer. He's a very profound writer. And Tom writes the kind of books and the kind of articles that nobody else is writing. That makes him very, very unique. And so I'm so excited to have him on the show today. Unfortunately, there were some production issues in this week's show. And so as you get into the interview, in certain parts of the interview, it's going to sound maybe like there's a TV on in the background or something. What that is it's the audio track of the latter half of the interview. Somehow or another, the computer imposed it into the former half of the interview. And so what was an hour and a half conversation ended up in an MP3 file of about 43 minutes. I don't know how in the world this happened. It's the craziest thing in the world. I have no way to explain it. Maybe there's some technical junkie out there somewhere who knows exactly what happened. And if so, email me and tell me what in the world happened and maybe how we can keep it from happening again. Unfortunately, the logistics of moving cross-country and going back and forth each week and spending all these countless hours in the truck, pulling the trailer back and forth, even burning the midnight oil, I did not have time to correct this to the degree that I would have liked to have corrected it. Please forgive me for that, but I felt that the content of this interview was such that it deserves to be heard, even if there are some broadcast flaws. And so with that said, we're going to go into our discussion with Tom Goodrich. Hello, Tom.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
I'm okay. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm doing well, thank you.
Oh, great. I'm glad we connected here. You're moving, right?
Yes, sir, I am. I'm in the process of moving to the Eastern Shore of Maryland right now.
I'd be more than happy to pitch in and help you move. I've done a lot of that myself. Have you done a lot of this before, Dr. Ed?
And it's not the first time I've done a cross-country move, but it's the first time that I've done one where I literally had to do it all myself.
Yeah, that's not good, brother. I've moved a lot. I've moved myself too at times. Most recently to Europe, Denmark, and Germany. It's not fun, but anyway, I'll tell you something. I don't know how much you've moved, but let me say that I've moved scores of times. And when I first started out with my first wife, we had a piano, we had bookcases, we had books, we had everything frontier people would normally take when they started west. And over the years, the decades, man, everything got, you find out really what you need, and because you don't want to keep lugging this around. And now I've got virtually nothing. I mean, I'm talking about a bicycle and a computer, and that's it.
I had the bicycle, and I took it and I sold it. It played against sports here the other day. I bought the thing new maybe 12 years ago, and I think I've ridden it twice. So
much to the deficit of your health, huh?
Yes. So I have to ask you the question then.
Yes.
Because you had said you had lived in Germany and Denmark, and I do not see myself ever emigrating to Germany. If for no other reason, my association with the Barnes Review, I'd probably be arrested on arrival. But Denmark is a place where I've considered a potential emigration.
Uh-huh.
So was your move to Denmark, was it an attempted emigration, or was there a reason why you didn't stay? I'm just curious.
Well, first of all, the most important thing I can say about Denmark, I had no trouble whatsoever moving there, living there, leaving there. I had no problem in Denmark. It was fairly inexpensive. I was living with a fellow national, a Danish guy. I got a lot done up there. Finished the book. I did a lot of promotion of it up there, and Denmark's a beautiful country. If at times it seems they're getting a handle on this immigration thing, and I believe they're even, correct me if I'm wrong, are pushing to deport many of them now, which is a great thing. But as far as Germany, I think if you mind your P's and Q's, if you don't, if you enter the country on a train, it always seems to work better for me. I've never had any problems ever, but it's when you make some noise over there, they'll be on you. But I didn't have any trouble in Germany, even though every day somebody went. We lived out in the country, myself and two other people. And every day a police car would go by on this lonely country road, slowly by this place where we lived. So they were very aware of us, but never had a problem. One of my roommates did. She's facing, of course, 5 years in prison now for stepping over the line with some comments she made. But like I said, I kept shut up. I didn't do anything. Denmark, I think it's felt comfortable. And I don't want to go too far with it because 6 months is not much. So I don't know, brother. It's, Europe is pretty much on lockdown right now. It's occupied, and they call the shots.
Well, this is going to sound bad, but this was probably, 13, 14 years ago now. I was staying down in Mexico for 6 weeks because there was a missionary friend of mine on furlough, and I was basically just, minding his store for him so that he could, take a little furlough and come back to the States and take care of a little bit of business. But there was a man in the church, and he invited me to lunch at his house one day. And he lived in a beautiful house, and he told me that he rented the house and that he paid a gardener to kind of do his lawn care and landscaping and everything. And he said that the cost of his house, his gardener, and his housekeeper, he said total it all came to about $700 a month. And the man was living in a mansion. And I asked him, I said, why he moved to Mexico, because he didn't go there, to do missionary work or whatever. He was a stockbroker. A few times during lunch, he would stop and he would, with his little laptop there, he'd make a stock trade or something. And I asked him, I said, why did you come to Mexico? And he told me, he said that he lived in San Antonio and he got tired of all of the Mexicans moving into his neighborhood. He said, so he moved to Mexico so he could be in an all-white neighborhood.
Isn't that rich? I've heard similar stories.
But that's kind of part of my thinking through the possibility of emigrating somewhere. I've been thinking, the only place where I could probably emigrate and be in a European cultured area would probably be Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, Finland, up that way, maybe Russia. Maybe I'm absolutely and totally wrong in it, but I'm just getting tired of being treated like a alien and a foreigner in my own country.
Yeah. I've also heard some good things about southern Argentina. They're at the opposite end of, their winters are summer and things like that. Yeah. But lots of Germans still there. There's some really beautiful German-like towns, people still speaking German. But let me encourage you use all the assets you have at your reach. In other words, friends you've got over there, people who know a lot about certain things. Yeah, I'd never recommend just simply, moving over and hoping to survive. Right. If you're good at computers, now that's one big problem that I face whenever I'm traveling, is I'm a moron. I'm an absolute monkey when it comes to a computer. And I am really up the creek without a paddle. When something wrong goes with this computer, I've got to have somebody do it for me. I hate to admit that. But it's little things like that can make or break a move that you're anticipating or thinking about at least. If you could just simply be around a comrade close by. And generally that's the way it is. It's the way it works because, we're winning this. It doesn't seem like it at times, but we're winning this war. And we've got more and more people popping up.
And the crazy thing is, and I've considered this as well, because I've made several mission trips to Cuba, and I absolutely love it there. and I realized that I'd be moving to a place where I might not have electricity every day, but and I also realized I would not be moving to I guess you could say a white place, be moving to a very brown and black place. But the difference is if I'm in Cuba and they treat me like a foreigner, I don't have a problem with that because I realize that I am one. The problem I have is being treated like a foreigner in my own country.
Yeah, I hear you. You already understand some of the pros and cons of moving different places.
Yeah.
I lived in Greece for a year, southern Greece, by the way, and it's different from northern Greece, much more primitive, similar to Spain and places like that. I don't know. Well, I do know why, because that's where the dark tide washes ashore. But down there in southern Greece, yeah, we might be without water for a week, or without electricity more often than not. I can tell you lots of, but if you already understand that, then half your battle is won, because that's real attrition, man. It'll wear you down after a while. And but let us talk about this if you ever get close enough to moving. I'm no expert for sure, but I can find people who are and can make this thing viable for you.
Your web browser and type in www.barnesreview.org and discover the Barnes Review magazine. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There is no more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review magazine in its print form, or in convenient electronic delivery. Our host has been a subscriber to both formats for years. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
Oddly enough, talking about me, I guess this explains some of me. I've only really felt at home in one place in this world, and that happened to be a village in Germany 10, 20 years ago called Nordlingen, and it's on something called the Romantische Straße, and that means romantic road in German. And I simply fell in love with this village, and I had no reason why, except it was very slow paced, and I just stopped by a fence of a little farm. It was in the shade of apple trees starting to bloom, and there were some chickens, and they were quietly preening the grass for seeds and little things like that, old hens, and I just became transfixed by the entire situation. And so I sat down on the grass and watched them, and before I knew it, almost an hour had gone by. And I had been feeding the chickens, of course, some green grass. They didn't have much of that inside their pen, but I was feeding them grass. And I decided that I had never felt like this before in my life. But anyway, long story short, 10, 15, 20 years later, I ran into a half-brother I didn't know I had. I grew up an only child, but 10, 15 years later, we accidentally met, and he informed me that our great-grandparents, had originally come from Nordlingen, had come to America from Germany, and Nordlingen was the town. So I'm not one who believes in these mysterious type of things, but this is one time when that's about the only mysterious thing that's happened in my life that I cannot explain, except there may have been something genetic about it, some genetic reach back for me, that my great-grandparents would actually have lived in this very same village that I felt totally at home in. So that's about as spooky as I get. From now on, everything is pretty realistic. It's like this. Okay, I am a German then. Let's face it, I am a German. And now that makes a lot of sense to me why the book I consider my most important, Hellstorm, The Death of Nazi Germany, why I would be compelled to write that book about the death and destruction at the hands of the Allies of Germany. So there's lots of things that were finally answered in this overly long life I've been allowed to lead, that now makes sense to me, and that's one of them. This quest for truth, too, that's a quality most Germans have. They love truth. It's something it's a component of the German makeup. It's love for truth. It's love for beauty. But anyway, I probably am getting off any questions or subjects you want to talk about. And as far as the books that appear in the Barnes Review for January and February, not the books, but the subject matter, they were drawn from books that are very similar to Hellstorm in that they're as honest and truthful and accurate and unbiased as I can possibly make two books.
So what do you say to those then that would accuse you of being biased or prejudiced in the way that you're telling the story?
And that's the way I've always treated history is, yes, of course, I've got plenty of bias and prejudice in me. One cannot live as long as I have and experience as much as I have without acquiring a good body of bias and prejudice. Thank goodness I've got that, because it's like this. I'm prejudiced and biased about a rattlesnake too. He probably will bite me if I let him, and so I avoid him. Or I'll stay at a real long distance and just observe him. But that's the way it is with me too now.
Well, before we talk about the articles, I want to point out something, and you might want to comment on it. And that is that a lot of your writing is very gruesome and very graphic in its nature. I told Paul Angel on a couple occasions in reading your pieces submitted to the magazine that it's very seldom that I can read one of your articles in one sitting. Normally I have to read it in 3, 4, 5 sittings. I've got to break it up. I can only read so much, and then I just have to stop. For example, when you were describing the Hiroshima and Nagasaki incidents, and you were just describing the way people were dying and the flesh was burning off of their skin as the result of this atomic explosion, and it was just so violent. I just couldn't take it in all at once. Your pieces in this particular issue were very lame. They were very tame in comparison. But a lot of times your writing is very graphic and very gruesome.
It's graphic nature. I don't think anyone's doing anyone a service to write about war as if it's glorious and manly, and somehow we need to keep doing this more often, because hiding the true nature of war is perpetuating war, in my opinion. And I've written that way. I think I have. People tell me the same thing that you're telling me now about the inability to continue reading about this graphic episode, whatever it may be, whether it was from Hellstorm or you mentioned the Japanese in summer 1945. Some people may find that ghoulish. They might find that, hey, this guy really gets off on blood and death and guts, and it's not so. And I don't think you'll doubt that once you start reading this. I want people to see what it's really like. And after that, if they say that they enjoyed the book, well, I simply wonder about their nature. If they say they enjoyed the book, no, it's something to get through, something to emerge from, but certainly not something to enjoy. And I've tried to treat even the books, even the subjects we'll talk about here when I get around to it. I'm sorry, I do go on. But that's the same approach, the same philosophy I have in every book I write. I want it to be as accurate as it possibly can be. I am there as a writer. I am in every one of my books, and I want people to know exactly what I went through during the research, during the writing, during the rewriting, during the editing of these books. I want them to understand exactly what I'm thinking and feeling, because I even did a true crime book once, and it was the same approach. Only there weren't millions of people killed in this book. It was one. But I still loved her so much. It was a book about, here in Florida, a cop's daughter, a police sergeant's daughter, who was actually One day, a beautiful girl, a new mother. She had 2 children, a husband, and she loved housework, and other girls are into tattoos and sex flings, things like that on the beaches of Florida. She actually embraced motherhood. If I'd had a daughter, it would have been her. But one day, some monster entered her door, abducted her, kidnapped her, took her back to his place, raped her for 3 or 4 hours, and then that evening took her out and killed her. And so I told that story also. And even the relatives who did not help me much with the book, I will say this, because it was their daughter, and they figured that I was just another writer trying to peddle murder to make a buck. And they read the book and later on said, no, this was totally different. You did care, and I do care about death of another beautiful young American woman. But the books that we're drawing from today on the articles in the Barnes Review, one was on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. It's called The Darkest Dawn, Lincoln, Booth, and the Great American Tragedy. And Lincoln, of course, there's probably thousands of books out there on Lincoln. And there's probably hundreds of good books out there on the assassination. And some people may say, well, why would you go after a book like this? It's been done to death. Because I thought and I knew and I was correct that there was lots of things that hadn't been said about the Lincoln assassination. And I won't go much further than that except to say that the subject of the article in the Barnes Review is simply about one of the character in a cast of characters that I picked out to send into the Barnes Review, about a character named Boston Corbett. Boston Corbett, some people, that name may mean something. Most people it won't. Boston Corbett was the assassin of the assassin, you might say. He was the guy who actually killed the assassin of Abraham Lincoln. He was a soldier. He was an odd duck, to put it mildly. He was a immigrant from England, came here early, had a tough life, like a lot of immigrants, most immigrants had back then. And he grew up wild and crazy, drunk, doing all the things that young men at that time did who lived virtually on the streets. But later on, he became enamored with God. Let's put it that way. He met a street missionary one night, and he was transformed immediately into to put it mildly, into a religious fanatic. From that moment on, he felt that he had a relationship with God, and he tried to improve it to the best of his ability. He became an evangelist himself, you might say. And he was a zealot, to put it honestly. It's okay, we can make fun of religious fanatics, Bible beaters, people like that, but Corbett was that. In fact, if it wasn't godly, he wouldn't live with it. In other words, he still had to work for a living. He still had to obey what the bosses said, but he just simply could not, because God always came first in his life. If he heard a fellow co-worker at a job, I don't know what the job might be, but if he heard them cussing, he would stop what he was doing right then and basically preach to them and try to get them to see the other side, the other way, a better way, he thought. And that's okay if you're on your own time, but when you're at work, expected to do your job, that's going to get you in some big trouble. And Corbett was constantly being fired and then being rehired by someone else, going through the same system over and over. And Corbett, how crazy was he about religion? Well, one night in Boston, he saw 2 girls, and apparently he was attracted to them. And they must have been attracted to him, either that or streetwalkers, professional streetwalkers. But whatever it was, Corbett felt his emotions getting out of control. He felt the devil rising. He felt that there was something terribly demonic about this. And so how crazy was Boston Corbett? Well, he was he ran home in a fit about this feeling he had, this sudden feeling. And what he did was he actually grabbed a pair of very sharp scissors and castrated himself. So that's the end of that problem. And but that's what I mean. He was literally nuts, you might say. I know that sounds like a poor joke, but he was crazy. But anyway, the long and short of it is Corbett eventually did find himself in the Army when the Civil War began, and he joined, and even at his stage, he knew that killing was bad, but he asked God about it, and God told him that killing is terrible, but the rebels deserve killing, and so go out and kill all you can, and he did. And it's that simple, virtually. But anyway, when Lincoln was assassinated, it just so happens that Boston Corbett was in Washington, D.C. that October 15th when Lincoln actually died. April 15th. 1865 when Lincoln died. And it also just so happens that in the hunt for John Wilkes Booth, the murderer of Abraham Lincoln, Corbett happened to be a cavalryman with a New York regiment who actually trailed Booth down to the barn where they found him. And despite orders against firing, Corbett did. John Wilkes Booth was trapped inside of a tobacco barn in Virginia, and he would not come out. He wanted to fight, not come out and surrender and simply be hung. And so he would not come out of the barn. Corbett found a crack in the barn. The barn had caught on fire, and so Booth was outlined, and Corbett shot and killed him, just against orders, of course. But Corbett went back to Washington, D.C. along with Booth's body under arrest because he had broken the rules, broken the law, and the government would have liked to have, I guess, questioned Booth about everything, to bring in everybody else connected with the murder. But when Corbett was finally delivered to Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, a really tough guy himself, and questioned, Stanton could see at a glance that this guy was crazy. And so basically he just said, the murderer, the rebel, is dead, the hero lives, turn him loose, let him go. So they let Boston Corbett go, and he became an instant celebrity throughout America. He was a hero. Nobody really knew what he was like, so they just assumed he was a normal fella who felt so strongly about it that he killed the murderer. And I probably shouldn't be telling the entire story because it's an article in the Barnes Review, and we want people to read that. But people started finding out about Corbett. He was extremely paranoid. He heard voices, of course, from God and other people giving him orders. He was a pretty sick individual, quite honestly, and people found that out. Corbett was extremely paranoid. He thought that Booth's Avengers were after him, and anyone anymore who came up for an autograph or wanted to talk to him, this famous hero, could just as easily have a pointed Colt Navy pistol at their head, moments away from having a bullet through their brain. But so Corbett eventually, in his checkered life, decided that he wanted to get out of the East, away from the East Coast, where all these stealthy assassins were hunting him down, so he felt. And he moved out west to Kansas. A lot of people were doing that, homesteading, getting free land, basically take care of it. Corbett, he moved from a shack in New Jersey to a hole in the ground in Kansas, Cloud County, Kansas. And he was, he brought his baggage with him. He was crazy as a loon. And he would scare people off his land with a shotgun blast. Little boys who played baseball nearby, he scared them off one day with a couple of loaded revolvers that now he was carrying full time. And so we've got this crazy guy out in Kansas. Well, what did the Kansans do? Once they realized they had a national hero out there, they knew they had to do something with him. And so rather than let him sit in that hole in the ground out in Cloud County, they brought him to Topeka to become third assistant doorkeeper at the state legislature there. I thought that was pretty cool. They have a guy, he's obviously going to guard the state house. He's got pistols and knives, and that worked for 1 month, and Corbett went absolutely Looney Tune, crazy, off the walls, nuts. And just so happens that when he was finally brought in front of the district attorney there, he saw the merit in putting this guy away forever, probably. But they took him down to the state lunatic asylum where he was going to live the rest of his life, except about a year later, he found a free horse. Being an ex-cavalryman, he jumped on it, and that's the last we ever heard of the man. In other words, he came into the world anonymous, and he left the world anonymous. No one knows what happened to him. But that's the story in this upcoming article. And of course, it's a small story inside a much larger story about the Lincoln assassination. And all these books we're talking about, by the way, are for sale at the Barnes Review. And so I know a lot of people subscribe to the Barnes Review. Well, by the way, this may be a good time to get a nice advertisement in there. The Barnes Review is the greatest magazine in the world. Period. It's simple. It's telling the truth when no one else will. It's doing it in a very nice way, too. It's a very well done magazine, telling the truth. And I know it has quite a few subscribers, and let me encourage everybody to resubscribe every time that notice comes up. Resubscribe, buy books. Buy all the books you can. Buy them for friends. Ask your friends and neighbors to subscribe to the Barnes Review. They're not going to go wrong with this magazine, I guarantee you.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States. The things that can directly impact you, your life, and the life of your family. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. Fortunately, there is an alternative news outlet with a long-established track record for honesty and integrity, and that is the American Free Press. AFP is the preeminent alternative, independent news source for honest, hard-working, truth-loving Americans. AFP is the antithesis of the controlled, lamestream media. AFP is employee-owned and has been so since its founding. Because of that, AFP never has and never will allow advertisers or special interests or big money to dictate what appears in the pages of the American Free Press newspaper. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. And AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. That's right, there's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories that are being censored and suppressed by the big money controlled media monopoly. And that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. In short, AFP is your voice. If you have any doubt why they want to silence AFP, you must be relying on the lamestream media for your news, and folks, that's a big mistake. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
Tom, you and I had talked off air about, it's one thing to be reading articles. It's one thing to be reading a magazine like the Barnes Review. It's one thing to be on the internet and consuming information, and it's quite another to be doing something with it. And of course, you told me how one of the reasons that you write the way that you write is because you want people to be so moved by the writing that you don't just want them to absorb the information, you want them to take that knowledge into the world and do something with it.
But also donate if you can. That's what I call activism. If you can donate money to something you believe in, that's financial activism. Maybe you cannot get out and actually march and fight and do things like that, but this is one great way, keeping something like the Barnes Review alive for future generations, because this is about the only place where you're going to find real history that's been neglected or denied or, as I mentioned earlier, shredded. History that the other side would love for us to forget about ourselves. And so that's my advertisement for the Barnes Review. I was a original subscriber to the Barnes Review when it first came out. But as I've mentioned, I've moved so much in my life, and it was up and down many times. And I eventually had to cancel the subscription, but now I'm back again. So it's a great magazine. Embrace it, love it, give it as much help as you possibly can, folks who are listening. It'll return the favor over and over and over again.
Well, I just want to say that I think that your article on Buffalo Bill that was in this past issue was probably one of the best articles that I've ever read in the Barnes Review. I enjoyed it thoroughly, of course, Buffalo Bill being one of those great American icons. Maybe you saw my editorial, my letter to editor Paul Angel that he published at the back of the magazine, where I had talked about what I thought was a great travesty that appeared back in the November-December issue when one of our other editors had inserted an article that he had written, and basically, he had said that, William Barrett Travis, the commander of the Alamo, didn't really draw the infamous line in the sand, and that Davy Crockett really didn't, he was a coward at the Alamo, and that he was found, hiding under a mattress, under a bed. And, basically what I said, he said Patrick Henry probably never said the famous words, "Give me liberty or give me death." And what I said was that our country needs its heroes. It needs its legends. And so I titled the letter, "Long Live the Legends." And Buffalo Bill is one of those great legends. Even if Davy Crockett did have a moment of cowardice after 12 days of constant bombardment, and I'm going to guess if he was found under a mattress, he was probably sleeping on the floor under the bed, so that if, the roof or the building were to collapse from a enemy bombardment in his sleep, he would have a little bit of protection. But, even if he did succumb to some, moment of cowardice after 12 days of bombardment, the guy was still a national hero. He was in Texas on a hunting trip. He could have just left. But instead, he stayed and he fought a battle that he knew that he wasn't going to win, just because it was the right thing to do. And, Buffalo Bill has been one of those people who, Davy Crockett, some had said that maybe, he just, didn't live up to the legend. Well, Buffalo Bill was definitely somebody who, they said he didn't live up to the legend. Buffalo Bill, maybe he should have been called Blowhard Bill, those kinds of things. And yet you did a great job of refuting that and saying that Buffalo Bill really was the man of legend, and he really was the kind of guy that legends are inspired by. And that the things that the legends say that he did, and that there were thousands upon thousands of soldiers in the U.S. Army who literally entrusted him with their lives, and he was one of the best scouts that was out there as these soldiers were trying to do what they were doing. And so, even though at the end of his life he was doing the Wild West shows, and yeah, there's a lot of spectacle to that, but the younger Buffalo Bill really was the real deal. And all the things that he, did the Wild West shows, he really did them in real life as a much younger man out in the real West. And so, just tell us a little bit about that article.
I'm a Johnny-come-lately to Buffalo Bill, quite honestly. I believed everything that was said about Buffalo Bill back in the bad old days. And I'm not going to put a conspiracy mark on this. I think it's simply who Buffalo Bill was. He was easy to easy to denigrate or diminish, whatever you will. I'm a Johnny-come-lately to Buffalo Bill. Let me say this. When I was doing research for the Indian War book, which was called Scalp Dance, also for sale at the Barnes Review, by the way,
and obviously Paul Angel the same.
I had to do a lot of research for it.
The cover had Buffalo Bill on it.
And one of the people I spoke with during the research of the book was some very old lady. I think she was either 95, 105, somewhere in there, whose mother had actually been captured by Indians in 1874. Now, to most people, and myself included at the time, the Indian Wars and the Civil War, they seem like they're might as well be back in the Stone Age. They seem so far removed from modern-day living. And yet that brought me so close to it that I've always felt since that time that I am very close to the Civil War and the American Indian Wars. But while I was lecturing, I hate the word lecture, while I was talking to an audience in San Francisco one day, a decade or so ago, it just so happens during the Q&A, the question and answer period after the talk was over, that some old gentleman, some old white-haired gentleman in the back stood up.
And that's where the recording was lost, of course. The continued conversation between Tom and I that we don't have here. You actually heard it. You heard it earlier in the broadcast, that background noise that was kind of muffled. That was the audio track of the continuation of the interview. And so maybe, hopefully, prayerfully, subliminally, somehow you have absorbed it by audio osmosis, and it's there in your subconscious brain, and at some point that information will find its way into your conscious brain. But some great stuff from Tom Goodrich, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to get to talk to him. And I know we will be interviewing him again here on this program because he is a regular feature, a regular writer in the Barnes Review, and he's told me that he will be happy for me to interview him anytime. So when he has articles in future magazines, I'll call him back, we'll interview him again, and hopefully next time we will get it right.
Hello, I'm Tom Strain, Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. The Confederate flag, Confederate symbols, and the reputation of our Confederate ancestors has come under attack. The Sons of Confederate Veterans is actively fending off our detractors, but there is only so much that we can do. We need your help. Contact your local, state, and national elected politicians and tell them that you will not tolerate these attacks on our heritage. You can also visit scv.org, download an application to join us in our fight to preserve our Southern heritage. Visit scv.org today. If you don't have a Confederate ancestor and you are tired of American history disappearing, you can assist us by becoming a friend of the SCV. Please visit scvheritagedefense.org and make a donation to the Heritage Defense Fund. We hope that you will join us in the fight to defend the Confederate soldiers' good name.
I had hoped that I could fill out the hour with some other audio of Tom Goodrich. And so I went on the internet and I tried to find audio or video of Tom. And I was able to find about 5 or 6 different interviews that he's done over the years. Apparently my interview with him was one of the shorter ones. Some of these interviews are over 3 hours long. It was just amazing how long some of this material was. But the quality of the recording was far worse. If you think that, even with our production issues this week, if you think that recording sounded bad, just go to YouTube, type in Thomas Goodrich or Thomas Michael Goodrich, and just listen to the horrible audio. at least you could make out what you just heard on our broadcast. You can't even make out what he's saying on these other YouTube videos. So even with our production issues, if you're listening on YouTube right now, you're hearing the clearest and the bestest audio of Tom Goodrich that's available on the internet right now, bar none. Anyways, we do have a little bit of time in today's broadcast, and we did not get to hear Tom talk at length about his article on Buffalo Bill, the life and exploits of an American icon, that appeared in the January-February issue of the 2020 Barnes Review magazine, our new issue here for this year. So what I want to do is I want to read the article to you, because this is really some good stuff. And so I'm just going to read that to you. And it begins, it says, with his long flowing hair and broad-brimmed hat, Buffalo Bill Cody looked like a cavalier of yore. But this picturesque American was a real-life hero, even without the legends that grew up around him. Buffalo Bill, The Life and Exploits of an American Icon, by Thomas Goodrich, read by yours truly. Although it is fitting that William F. Buffalo Bill Cody, born 1846, built his home in North Platte, Nebraska, in the midst of the Great Plains that he loved and lived so much of his life on, the pretty white Rocco house with green trim is actually a prairie memorial to the patience and perseverance of his wife, Nee, born in 1843 as Louisa Maud Frederici, or Lulu as Cody called her. For most of her married life, Lulu was a widow in every sense but name. In a nation teeming with restless men, Bill Cody was perhaps the most restless of them all. Even before he had cleared his teens, the wild and reckless youth had already served in the West as a teamster, a Pony Express hanger-on, a jayhawker, and a Union soldier. Upon his marriage to Lulu in 1866, Cody manfully tried to settle down by opening a hotel near Leavenworth, grandly dubbed the Golden Rule House. The name, at the very least, suggests that the young man's heart was in the right place. But in no way was Cody cut out to juggle books or lug trunks and carpet bags up and down the steps. And so that very same year, hardly before she had combed the last grain of rice from her hair, Lulu watched as the handsome bridegroom dashed away west and left her in the lurch. Once on the plains, Lulu's hawk-eyed husband shot so many American bison that he earned his new nickname, Buffalo Bill. As a hunter and scout for the Army, Cody's feats of bravery and endurance soon became legendary. In 1868, General Phil Sheridan at Fort Hays was frantic to warn other Kansas posts that the Kiowas and Comanches were on the warpath. Several couriers had already been killed in the attempt. Quoting Sheridan, Cody, learning of the strait I was in, manfully came to the rescue and proposed to make the trip to Fort Dodge, though he had just finished his long and perilous ride from Fort Larned. After 4 or 5 hours' rest, he mounted a fresh horse and hastened on his journey. At Dodge, he took 6 hours' sleep, and then he continued on to his own post, Fort Larned, with much dispatches. After resting 12 hours at Larned, he was again in the saddle with tidings for me at Fort Hays. Thus in all, Cody rode about 350 miles in less than 60 hours, and such an exhibition of endurance and courage was more than enough to convince me that his services would be extremely valuable in the campaign, so I retained him at Fort Hays and then made him chief of scouts for that regiment. It was not long before word of such daring deeds in the West spread to the sedate East, and the same hack sensationalists who had raised other frontiermen and women into larger-than-life legends soon went to work on Cody. Unlike Kit Carson or Martha Calamity Jane Canary and others who remain largely indifferent to such spin, Buffalo Bill reveled in it, and whenever the opportunity availed, he added to it. Conveniently left out, of course, was the fact that Cody also drank, gambled, cavorted, sported, and sinned with the best of them. Readers throughout America thrilled to the dime novel adventures of Buffalo Bill, King of the Bordermen, and Buffalo Bill's Last Trail. But despite such far-fetched accounts, in which the only fact most scribblers got straight was the spelling of the subject's name, and despite Cody's own shameless self-aggrandizement, the raw material for the legend was amazing enough. So great was the real and the faux fame of William F. Cody that by the 1870s, scores of star-struck young men came west who, in every way possible, tried to imitate their hero. One of these pilgrims was a chap named Charlie White. By all accounts, Charlie was a likable enough guy. A good-natured liar, said one soldier. A fellow of average intelligence, but not without redeeming qualities. When it came to his hero, however, Charlie was a hopeless toady. Unlike most admirers who were happy to merely meet Buffalo Bill, shake his hand, and then leave, while White never left. As Sancho Panza faithfully followed Don Quixote, so too did Charlie White trail Buffalo Bill wherever he went. Come hell or high water. Many a time did the plainsman try to give his annoying new shadow the slip, but to no avail. Eventually, Cody just gave up. Wherever I went, no matter how dangerous the errand, my new friend went along, sighed the famous scout. At camp each night, when others were content simply to flop down in the dust after a hard day's ride, White would rush to boil his idol's coffee, hurry to cook his food, dash to clean his gun, run to shake out his roll, and streak to curry his horse. This he happily did before he tended to his own affairs. As if the slavish spectacle were not already egregious enough, Charlie made sure he dressed like Cody, walked like Cody, talked like Cody, and grew his hair like Cody. During one of Buffalo Bill's periodic absences from the plains, in which he lectured and performed on eastern stages, Phil Sheridan set up a tent and started taking applications for scouts to serve in an upcoming Indian campaign. One of the first men to saunter into the general's office was Charlie White. "Who the hell are you?" asked the hard-nosed commander. "When Cody is not here," replied White, "I am Buffalo Bill." "The devil you are," cried Sheridan. "Buffalo." You know the word, more likely. Crestfallen, Charlie hung his head and slunk from the tent. Painful as the encounter was, things got worse for White in a hurry. Someone outside the tent had been listening. In a matter of minutes, the terrible new nickname raced through the camp, and within weeks it had reached every army post in the West. Never more just plain Charlie White. Buffalo excrement, you know the word, became the standing joke of the plains. Newspaper reporters covering the Indian Wars laughed just as loud and as long as the soldiers. With the delicate sensibilities of their Eastern readers in mind, though, the journalists simply referred to White in their dispatches as Buffalo Chips, or just Chips for short. Desperately did poor Charlie try to escape this horrible moniker with feats of daring do, but nothing worked and the name stuck. Although he fought with amazing bravery in numerous Indian encounters, from which he managed to win the Congressional Medal of Honor, it was the last which became William Cody's most noted. Following George Armstrong Custer's devastating defeat and death in Montana at the Little Bighorn in June 1876, a nervous U.S. Army was desperate to prevent similar debacles. 2 weeks after the fight, while his regiment was camped along Warbonnet Creek in northwest Nebraska, Cody galloped in at dawn to warn Colonel Wesley Merritt that a huge band of Cheyenne warriors was nearby. When the Indians were finally spotted moving in his direction, Merritt quickly prepared an ambush. The plans were thwarted, however, when a military wagon train unexpectedly rumbled onto the scene. While Merritt, Cody, Captain Charles King, and several others watched from behind a hill, 2 couriers from the train were spied riding out to meet the cavalry. At the same time, an advance party of Indian warriors saw the messengers and whipped their horses down a ravine to surprise them, wrote Charles King. "Only a mile away come our couriers, only a mile and a half up the ravine. The Cheyenne lashed their excited ponies into eager gallop, and down they come toward us." "By Jove, General," says Buffalo Bill, sliding backwards down the hill, "now's our chance. Let our pouty mount out of here, out of sight, and we'll cut those fellows off." "Up with you, then," is the answer. "Stay where you are, King. Watch them till they are close under you, then give the word. Come down, every other man of you." I am alone on the little mound. Glancing behind me, I see Cody. Tate and Chips, with 5 cavalrymen, eagerly bending forward in their saddles, grasping carbine and rifle. Every eye bent upon me in breathless silence, watching for the signal. Not a horse or a man of us visible to the Indians. Only my hatless head and the double field-glass peer over the grassy mound. Half a mile away are our couriers now, rapidly approaching. With the Indians pounding closer to the 2 unwary whites, King found the tension almost unbearable. At last, Merritt calmly gave the go-ahead. "All ready, King. Give the word when you like." "Now!" yelled the impatient captain to those below. Setting spurs to their mounts, Buffalo Bill and the rest raced up the ravine. Cody was riding a little in advance of his party, and one of the Indians was preceding his group, recalled a private peering through a telescope atop a butte. From the manner in which both parties acted when they met, it was certain that both were surprised. Cody and the leading Indian appeared to be the only ones who did not become excited. In the scout's words, "Both of us rode at full speed. When we were only 30 yards apart, I raised my rifle and fired. His horse dropped dead under him, and he rolled over on the ground to clear himself of the carcass. Almost at the same instant, my own horse stepped into a hole and fell heavily. The fall hurt me but a little. The chief and I were both on our feet now, not 20 paces apart. We fired each other at the same instant. His bullet whizzed harmlessly past mine head, while mine struck him full in the breast. He reeled and fell, but I took no chances. He barely touched the ground when I was upon him, knife in hand, and drove the steel into his heart." Reveling in his victory over Cheyenne Chief Yellow Hair, so named for the scalp of a white woman he carried, Cody bent over the foe, and according to the private watching through the telescope, neatly removed his scalp. Galloping back to Merritt with the wide-eyed Charlie White at his side, the plainsman raised his grisly trophy in triumph. "Here is one for Custer," he shouted. While his hero dashed off after more Indians, White accordingly dismounted, and we all surrounded him, one witness remembered. He related the whole of Buffalo Bill's exploit with great glee, and made us think that the days of Achilles and Hector had been renewed on Warbonnet Creek. Poor fellow, Buffalo Bill seemed to him bigger than all the generals of the United States Army. As dozens of similar incidents make clear, when all the smoke and mirrors were cleared from the stage, Buffalo Bill Cody was still the genuine article. There may have been better riders, better shooters, better trackers, better talkers, and even better liars, but no one man so richly captured the public's imagination or so romantically embodied the spirit of the West as William F. Cody. Incontestably brave, bold to a fault, Buffalo Bill was considered by Army officers and men alike, those whose lives were entrusted unto his care, as the best overall scout on the plains. He was, said one grateful soldier, a paragon. Thus, when we moderns conjure Cody, we must be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. After Cody the myth is separated from Cody the man, there is still more than enough remaining to qualify Buffalo Bill as, if not the greatest American of all time, then certainly the most interesting American of all time. Not only did his life span much that is considered truly American, the Great Migration West, the railroads, the riverboats, the Pony Express, the Civil War, and the Indian Wars. Later, Cody even shaded his eyes in mute fascination as airplanes roared overhead, but Buffalo Bill took an active role in all. Like Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone before him, William F. Cody, stripped of myth, remains a great bronze statue in every American's courthouse square. Love him, like him, hate him, Buffalo Bill was the real deal. And remarkably, love him, like him, hate him, Lulu, too, somehow managed to stay with her famous husband right to the very end. Bill died in 1917, Louisa in 1921. She was buried with her husband on Lookout Mountain in Colorado. And that was that great article by Tom Goodrich in the last Barnes Review magazine. And those are the kinds of articles that you can read every time you get the Barnes Review magazine in the mail. And so if you're not a subscriber to TBR magazine, you definitely want to become one. Go to www.barnesreview.org, www.barnesreview.org, and you can see how you, like myself, can be a subscriber to the Barnes Review, and I promise you will be glad that you did. If, for whatever reason, you subscribe to the Barnes Review and you decide that it is not your cup of tea, just let us know and we will refund the unused portion of your subscription. But I know you're going to love it. If you weren't the kind of person who was going to love it, you probably wouldn't even be listening to TBR Radio right now. But we are out of time for this week's broadcast. Tune in next week. You will hear the continuation of my discussion with congressional candidate Art Jones. He is running for the U.S. Congress seat, U.S. House of Representatives seat in Illinois' 3rd Congressional District there in Chicago. You will want to listen to that discussion. The discussion did start this week on my other show, TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Show. So go to www.barnesreview.org, pull up the radio tab there, listen to the first half or the first 30 minutes of my discussion with Art Jones there on the Dixie Heritage Show, and then tune back in again over here next week. Here are the remaining hour of that conversation. And so until then, from all of us here at TBR Radio, God bless. See you next week.